So we need to define some words, some musical terminology that I'm going to be using all the time. All musicians are going to be using all the time. You're going to read on the internet, see everywhere, just some stuff you really got to know. So these are some important terms, and I'm going to do my best to define them for you and do some playing on the keyboard as well so you can hear what they sound like. The first term is a scale. Now, you might have heard people talk about musical scales before. A scale is basically a defined pattern or set of notes within an octave. Remember, an octave is from one note to the next note that has the same name. So from C to C, F to F, A to A, G sharp to G sharp, E flat to E flat, that's an octave. And because after an octave, everything repeats, right? Like we had C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C again, and then D, E, F, G, A, B, C again, D, E, F, G, A. It just repeats on and on. So a scale only exists really as a pattern within one octave because then it repeats going in either direction. Whatever the pattern is inside one octave, inside the space of one octave, it repeats in every other octave. So scales serve as a collection or a pool of notes to draw from when you're creating melodies, chords, bass lines, and any other musical structures. Those are some other words we're going to define in just a second. So when we have a scale, such as this basic C major scale, that's a set of 7 notes that we can use to create our song from. And these 7 notes work well together. That's the point of scales. Scales create sets of notes that work together so that when we want to create a song, we choose a scale and then we can write all of the parts of the song using the notes inside that scale. And we know that they're going to work well together. So scales form the basis of Western music. When I say Western music, I'm talking about North America, South America, Europe, basically anything but Asia, India, Middle East, Africa. These cultures have different ways of looking at music, and they're not spread out like this keyboard is spread out with these 12 notes inside the octave like we do. They have different systems, lots of different systems actually. But in Western music, we have these scales, and these scales form the basis of our music. They're what allow us to create songs. And a scale is defined by its root note. So its root note is the note you name it from. It's the most important note in the scale, like the root of a tree, root note. So the C major scale I just talked about, the root note is C. That's the most important note in the scale. Listen to this. You see when I hit that last note, it feels like it's complete. I'm going to do it again, but I'm not going to hit the last note. See, it feels kind of weird. I can even go the other direction too. See, when you hear that one, it feels complete. That's because C is the root note of the scale. It's the note that the whole scale is based off of, and all of the other notes revolve around that note. It's the most important note. So a scale is defined by its root note and also the pattern of notes. If we change the pattern, we get a different sounding scale. There's lots of kinds of scales. Some of them are weird. Some of them are cool. They all have different feelings to them. And the more scales we know, the more choices we have when we compose music. But for now, we just want to understand what a scale is. The 2 most important kinds of scales are major and minor. And these words are going to be very important for us to get used to, major and minor. For now, we'll just say that major sounds more bright, more positive in a certain way, and minor sounds darker. So it feels a little darker, a little scarier in a way, sadder maybe, versus this one. So major is the brighter one, and minor is the darker one. The next term I wanted to define is melody. A melody is when you have a string of single notes, just like I played before, but we can make it any kind of string, like this. That's a melody. That's a melody. That's a melody you might know. So melodies make up the part of music that people sing, people hum, what gets stuck in your head. Melodies are like the point that most people glom onto or grab onto when they hear a piece of music. And really, a melody is just a string of single notes, one after another. That's a short little melody. Now, harmony, also called chords a lot of the time, is when you have multiple notes played together. Those are chords. That's harmony. Those are just synonyms, two ways of saying the same thing. So a chord is when you play more than one note at a time. And you can get all sorts of different chords that feel different. And just by changing one note in the chord, you get a very different chord. Chords create a lot of the emotional feeling within music, and learning how to use them will let us choose what our songs sound like. So chords are very important, and there's two important kinds of chords, two main kinds of chords that most people know about and are used all the time. And again, this is major and minor. Here's what a major chord sounds like. Fairly pleasant and bright. And here's a minor chord, a little darker. Major, minor. Here's a different minor chord. Here's a different major chord. Major, minor. Minor chords are darker, just like minor scales are darker. Minor everything is darker. Major is brighter, minor is darker. The next term I want to define is bass lines. Bass lines are just low melodies. So when you hear melodies that are played way down low like that, that's a little kind of a bass line. So bass lines are usually played by bass guitars or synthesizers, cello, things that play really low notes. We're going to learn a lot about bass lines because a lot of modern forms of music rely on bass lines as a very important part of the musical structure, and bass lines can create a lot of different feelings within the music, so it's important to get a good handle on them. But for now, all we need to know is that a bass line is a very low melody. The last thing I want to talk about is rhythm. Rhythm means the duration or length of notes and the spaces between them. So every kind of note has a rhythm because it has a length that it plays for. So here's a constant rhythm, a slow, long rhythm, a frantic rhythm, everything in music essentially has a rhythm. If it has a pitch, it must have a rhythm of some sort. Even if it's just a single note, that's rhythm. It has a point where it starts and a point where it ends. So it's rhythmic. And there are instruments that are solely rhythmic, that are only rhythm, like drums and percussion. Drums and percussion are rhythmic instruments. They have a little bit of pitch to them, but not really. The pitch isn't that important. What matters is the rhythm. And rhythm is such a fundamental part of music. It creates what we call groove, which is what you bob your head to or tap your foot to or dance to. And rhythm plays out in all aspects of music. We're going to talk a whole lot about it because, again, a lot of the modern styles of music rely heavily on drums and funky rhythms and beats and things like that to get their feeling. So getting a good sense of rhythm is important, but it will come naturally as we work through the songs that we create within Lydian. And as I mentioned, it's not just drums that have rhythm. Every kind of instrument must have rhythm. If there are notes, rhythm goes with it. There's no such thing as notes without rhythm, but there is such a thing as rhythm without notes. Drums can have no note but still be rhythmic, meaning they're like noise, like we talked about earlier. They don't have a definable pitch, a discernible pitch, a frequency. They just have noise, but the noise can be rhythmic. But if you have a pitch, it has a rhythm too. It has a start and an end to it. It has rhythm. So once again, those terms were scales, melodies, chords, bass lines, and rhythm. These are the main elements that create music today, and we're going to dive into them in the future in an in-depth way for each of them and start to learn how to compose each part of it, and then we're going to be able to make entire songs out of these elements.